Murray's X19 has a problem with the clutch. The symptoms suggest that the clutch plate is worn, but this can't be the case as he has not covered that many kilometers. I'm suspecting it's more to do with the clutch lever. This other X19 is owned by Kewan. He has a different problem, with an oil leak coming from the center of the car. This indicates it's more likely going to be the main seal. The battery was disconnected from both cars at this time. First, they removed the wheel and then the brake calipers. Now to unstake the axle hub retaining nut and remove it. Murray is now unbolting the struts from the carrier while the assembly is supported. Where Kewan is going to remove the struts still attached to the carrier, as his struts have had a camber adjustment done, and in order to preserve them, he'll take them out as one unit. However, as you can see, he has run into some trouble as the nuts are spinning and not coming off. So by drilling the centers, this will weaken the bolt so it can easily be snapped off. Now unbolt the control arm, taking note of which shims are in place so they can be put back the same way, then simply slip out the control arm. Draining the gearbox oil, then with the carrier no longer connected to the strut, Murray is now unscrewing the 3 nuts on the top of the strut and lowering it out of position. Now to unplug the reverse switch from the gearbox. Time to detach the clutch slave cylinder from the gearbox, then unscrew the speedometer cable, unbolt the earth strap, and following that, remove the gear shift linkage as well. Now to pop out the inner stub axle, using a block of wood to knock it out. This method eliminates the need to remove the bolts and deal with having to torque them up again later. He will also be changing the oil and filter. By removing the filter, this will provide more room for the starter motor to be removed. Just 3 bolts hold the starter motor in place, then with the wires disconnected, it just needs to be slipped out of place. Time to remove the 3 bolts and 1 nut that hold the bell housing in place. Additionally, there's a small bolt that secures a plate in place, which also needs to be removed. Supporting the engine from under the car, he has now removed the lower engine mount by removing the 4 bolts that hold it in place. Detaching the lower engine mount from the gearbox also makes it easier to get the gearbox out. It's only attached at 3 points. So that's it, he's now ready to wiggle the gearbox out of position. It should come off with a few good wiggles, if not, something's probably holding it still in place. With Murray's gearbox now on the floor, inspecting the movement, it looks like something is not quite right. Murray attempted to undo the lever bolt, but it essentially just fell off. It appears that the bolt was broken inside the lever. Because of this, the angle of the bolt break changed the position of the clutch release bearing, making it appear that the clutch was worn. We then struggled to remove the broken bolt, but wasn't really possible due to its poor access. We cut a groove thinking it might screw out, but that didn't work. Not wanting to spend any more time on this, we decided the best action would be just to cut it out with an angle grinder, as Murray already had a replacement. So now with the replacement lever and new bolt in place, the lever appears to be moving correctly. The bearing is now back in place and it's time to secure it with the clips. Now for Kewan's gearbox, we can see there's oil inside the bell housing. Removing the pressure plate only to find once again the wrong type of clutch disc was used. Removing the flywheel reveals the leaking main seal. However, previously Kewan used a seal additive to slow the leak down and it looks like it's done a good job. Yet it's still best to replace the seal. Cleaning the area of oil, then using a screw into the old seal to lever it out. Now with the seal removed, he's cleaning off any dirt, oil and old thread locking compound. Preparing the replacement seal with rubber grease to ensure it does not tear while being installed. Now gently placing the seal, ensuring there is no overhang, and then using a plastic tool to verify it's properly aligned. With the seal correctly positioned, utilizing a cup with the same diameter as the seal is pressed into place. Next, to meticulously clean off any excess grease including from the bolt holes. Then using a wire brush to remove any old compound residue from the flywheel and the bolts. Reinstalling the flywheel, ensuring its correct orientation at top dead center. Initially tightening the bolts without applying the final torque. This step ensures that the flywheel is snugly mated to the crank, preventing thread locking compound from seeping between the crank and the flywheel. Installing the flywheel lock, then removing and applying each bolt one at a time with a drop of thread locking compound. And then finally torquing them up to specification. Earlier it was mentioned that Kieran removed the struts while it was still attached to the carrier to preserve the camber adjustment. Additionally, the top of the strut mounts will need replacing since all the bolts have been broken. Therefore, the process involves compressing the spring to remove and replace the old ones with a good second-hand one. The previously dirty and oily gearbox has now been cleaned and is ready for reinstallation. Cleaning the surface, as there's bound to be some grease from our hands on them. We also observed that the clutch plate on Murray's car did not meet factory specifications, however the replacement does. We decided to replace it with the correct type. So now on with the new correct disc and the original pressure plate, then torquing it up to specifications. Using a transmission jack to raise the gearbox to the engine. Now we're putting the shaft back into position and aligning it before carefully whacking it back in place. The next step is to mate the gearbox back to the engine. Reinstalling the 3 bolts and 1 nut that mount the bell housing to the engine, torquing them up to specified values. Now with the best access available, it is the ideal time to reinstall the lower plate cover. Following that, reinstalling the lower engine mount, bolting it to the chassis and the gearbox, remembering to torque everything to specifications. Reassemble the clutch slave cylinder and attach it to the gearbox. Reattach the wires to the starter motor and install it in place. Then connect the reverse light switch connector and return the stub to the carrier. With the shims back in position, torque the control arm bolts while the arm is supported. Reattach the strut, reinstalling the nut and securing it in place. Now cleaning the disc of any grease and attaching the pads and caliper. Reconnecting the gear linkages and the earth strap, then proceeding to top up the gearbox and engine oil, making sure to include a new filter. After that, the only step left is to reattach the wheel and take it for a test drive.